Hi guys, Claudia Boleyn here. So as you know, the aim of this channel at the moment is to try and counter misinformation, and I'm focusing on the Meghan and Harry thing. You already know that. So somebody I wanted to kind of take on here and do a video about is somebody called Dr. Todd Grande. You may have seen him if you're interested in, like mental health recovery, true crime. He's quite big on YouTube. So I believe he has 1.25 million subscribers, and this is a channel that I've had some problems with for a while, but I thought it would actually be worth making a video on him because it's heavily biased. It peddles misinformation under the guise of being like academic and objective, which it definitely isn't. It's got a very inappropriate and spiteful tone, but most of all it's victim blaming, which I've noticed, which is the most worrying thing, because if you're blaming victims, which first of all, like that isn't that isn't an intelligent thing to do. I mean, it's not academic to blame victims, but to do that under the guise of being like intelligent and being objective is just so, it's like evil, that's just so cruel. It's not just someone's opinion, it's putting down victims. So I'd seen his stuff recommended to me before because I'm really interested in trauma work. In case you didn't know this about me, I'm an abuse survivor, so and I'm very interested in those kind of things, so the YouTube algorithm kind of like points me towards him. And there is nothing so gutting as seeing somebody peddle both misinformation and victim blaming and pretending that it's this unbiased academic thing. It is one of the most grifty channels, one of the most fake and harmful channels I've seen on YouTube, really. And I think it's mostly because of the lie. I think it would be all right if someone was just putting their poisonous and inaccurate opinions out there, but to do it under the guise of, I'm unbiased. As you'll see, I'm going to go through this whole video. This will be a long one, but I really wanted to get to the absolute heart of this because I'm so fed up of it. Also, I have no fear about doing this because based on his videos, he would probably hate me anyway and really condemn me because I'm an abuse victim and because I talk about it, I guess he would probably hate me anyway. So, I've got nothing to lose here. So why not use this channel for some good in the world? So a previous video he makes videos about Meghan and Harry, and it's so funny because he sits there and he pretends to be really objective and calm and rational, but his thumbnails, like the one I saw the other day, I haven't watched this one, if you like this video I could go through it, called Duke of Nonsense. And he's sitting there very seriously in the middle, and it says Duke of Nonsense, and then there's Harry's face in the corner. So unbiased. Prince Harry and life coaching, the dangers of pseudo-scientific, semi-active ... He makes a lot of very long... He's one of those people that, some people that think intelligence is using a lot of big words and making puns that don't land. Do you know that sort of person? He's that sort of person. So, if you want to watch, I will put obviously a link to the video I'm going to talk about here in my description box. You might not want to watch it because you might not want to give him your views, but also I want to give you a fair shot. Part of the reason I think he's so dangerous is because he pretends to be unbiased. And I think that in itself is such a lie, because everyone's biased. I'm not going to come on here and act like I'm speaking the objective, rational truth. I'm speaking the truth as I see it, my opinions as I see it. And they're coming from me, based on my life experience and what I think. I'm not trying to sit here and be like, I'm objective and rational. And, I think anyone who tries to present themselves as the rational, unbiased person talking about an issue is already so dodgy. Truly, because I think a genuinely a good person wouldn't, they wouldn't be doing that. They'd be making clear their biases, because you understand that everyone has biases. And I just want to say as well, there are a couple of videos on Dr. Todd Grande which I saw prior to making this, actually this morning. So a lot of other people trained in the field have actually called him out. He often not only takes the side of the abuser and minimises abuse, but he also mocks the victim a lot of the time. Which is really worrying for someone with his qualifications. I just looked at his qualifications, and not that it matters, you don't need to have qualifications to have an opinion, but don't then act like you're being this, his qualifications aren't quite what they seem. He trains counsellors, which is fine, and that's good, but he does sit there and act like he's actually, diagnosing people in this impartial, judge of different personality types and things, and it's dodgy. There are two amazing videos about that which I'm going to put in the description box by people who are actually in the field. I'm not in the field. I'm coming at this from the perspective of an abuse survivor who is interested in trauma dynamics and interested in the British media and oppression. That's my angle, and that's where it comes from, and I hope you appreciate, even if you don't agree with me, that I'm being open about my angle. So this video, the most recent one, is called Hot Air Spare. And because he's so popular, he gets thousands and thousands of views. And people who tend to think that because he sits there, very deadpan, and kind of talks in a very monotone way, that it's somehow more official, that somehow it's more academic. And, you know, that's not the case. That's really not the case. So he says he's analysing Prince Harry's 60 Minutes interview. And the actual subtitle is Prince Harry's 60 Minutes interview analysis. Has Harry transformed into his worst fear? So again, it's not unbiased. And I think, you know, naming it Hot Air Spare, that is not a professional thing to do. Straight away, is it? No. Okay. He always begins his videos by saying that he's offering his analysis and that he isn't diagnosing anybody, and there's no inflection in the voice. You know, it's very, I'm offering my, I don't want to do an impression. I'm not knocking him as a, you know, the way he is, but it's very restrained. You know, there's no passion in it, as if that's supposed to make it more rational, you know, which is really cruel, because when you're actually peddling misinformation about people and being a victim blamer and actually being quite spiteful, as we'll see, there's something particularly wicked about sitting there and acting like it's weird. Acting like, no, I'm just telling you the facts. But anyway, yeah, he says he's offering his analysis and says he isn't diagnosing anybody. Okay, so he begins his videos with like a sort of factual roundup. So he'll look at a case, sometimes true crime, sometimes celebrity, and he just like does like a bit of a Wikipedia opening, you know, like these are the people involved, this is how many children they have, etc. So he starts, you know, who Harry is, who Meghan is, who William is, who Kate is, and their children. Then he suddenly lurches into, Harry and Meghan have been complaining about the British royal family and the British press for several years now. They have given details of alleged wrongdoings and portrayed themselves as victims. The couple has earned millions of dollars doing this, through deals with Netflix, Spotify, and other companies. Harry has been promoting a book titled Spare, which brings me to his interview on 60 Minutes. And what I can say in terms of my expertise, my lived experience, sure, but also English literature degree, creative writing masters, we're not looking at unbiased language here. And I think if people understood that more, see, English literature does have a great place in our society because it helps you realise when you're being sold propaganda. And words are so loaded, like word choice is so loaded, especially when it's scripted, like the way he seems to script his videos. Complaining about the British royal family already presents them as these sort of negative nuisances, doesn't it? They've given details of alleged wrongdoings and portrayed themselves as victims. I mean, it's kind of true, but it's very loaded. It's very loaded language. The couple has earned millions of dollars doing this. Now that, if you're analysing this English literature style, you'd say, why is that sentence coming after the last one? Implication between the sentences is that they are making up the wrongdoings, portraying themselves as the victims in order to earn millions of dollars. That's the implication. He mentions their deals with Netflix, Spotify, and other companies, which it's odd that he leans so heavily on them kind of grifting on this, when isn't his whole channel a grift? Like, here's the thing, like, and I feel like we need to be completely open about this. When you have a YouTube channel, like mine as well, you know, we talk about pop culture events and we talk about things that are in the news because they're relevant, because you get viewers and because you've got something to offer. But especially him, he seems to, every time a true crime case comes up or anything happens in the news, he's rushing to get content out. Often it's not factually correct and it blames a victim. And especially when it comes to something like true crime, that's incredibly dangerous because these are real people's lives. True crime means like real world danger, you know, real murder and real victims. And he's kind of making money off that. I have my thoughts on true crime anyway and the way people engage with true crime. I won't get into that in this video, but I certainly think if it's not victim focused and it's not understanding focused in terms of educating about how we can like protect against things in the future, and if things are disrespectful to the victims or the families, I just don't like it. I don't like that. So that's really interesting that he mentions, you know, Netflix, Spotify and other companies. And he's promoting his book. All this put together, the implication is that it's all for attention, right? That's the implication here. He then tells us that much of the following is paraphrased because he's going to go through the 60 Minutes interview. I don't know why he needs to say that. He's hardly started off very professionally. But anyway, this made me laugh because you'll see it yourself when I read this to you. The first part is meant to be a fact exercise, right? It's supposed to be just laying down the facts. The second part is meant to be the analysis, right? So it's slightly more biased. The first part is incredibly biased. I was surprised when we got to the second part and he said, anyway, now for my analysis. I was like, oh, was that the facts? Was that the facts? I don't think it was. Okay, here we go. Harry has repeatedly made negative statements about his family, but he never intended for any of those hurtful statements to be hurtful. That's not unbiased. That's implying that he's a hypocrite. It's saying he's made these negative statements, but he never intended the hurtful statements to be hurtful. It's just... It's interesting. I don't know if he thinks he's slick by doing this. In some ways, I think he kind of knows he's doing it, and I think everyone who kind of enjoys the channel is kind of in on it. It's that unspoken thing where it's like, we're not going to say it, but we're going to heavily imply it, and we're going to enjoy it. Like, we're going to enjoy bullying these people. We're going to do it. And again, part of the reason, it isn't just his malicious tone and his, like, kind of deception in his videos, which is so unpleasant to me, but it's the fact that it's also taking out the context, right? And when you're trying to portray yourself as, like, academic and these are the facts, to do that without context and also without understanding, you know, I'm obviously British, I'm here in Britain, and there's so many times in this video where he seems to like act confused about things which are like a mystery to him, as if it makes it a weird conspiracy, which if you actually did your research, it's just him being confused because he didn't research something. And he presents it as, suspicious, I don't quite understand. It's like, well, if you researched it, you would understand, and it wouldn't be so suspicious to you. You have created the suspicion from your own ignorance. And again, let's go through I know we go through these all the time, but why not? Why not? This will be a long one, but why not? The hurtful statements he's made about his family. Now, has Harry made hurtful statements about his family? No. No, he hasn't. He's spoken about unconscious bias. He's spoken about his mistreatment, Meghan's mistreatment from his own perspective, you know, from his own point of view. He's done this from his own mouth. To miss out the point that Harry is doing this from his perspective, and his argument is he's doing this publicly because the royal family and members of his family are trapped in a sort of media cycle where they have to kind of give things to the disgusting bullyish media in order to save themselves, so they throw other people under the bus. And he's saying that they are briefing against him and Meghan because it kind of gets them off the hook. It's a terrible cycle. So every time you'll see you know, the palace has declined to comment, or the royals haven't commented, his argument is that actually all the royal experts that they deploy are actually speaking for them and setting the narrative. It's fine if you don't agree with that, if you think that's not true, but to misrepresent his actual argument tells me that there's something very malicious in these videos, and they're not really about truth and objectivity, because even if I'm arguing someone else's perspective that I don't agree with, I'm not going to sit there and pretend like I don't want to misrepresent their argument, because what's the point, you know? It just shows my own, you know, lack of understanding of the issue, you know. He goes on. Harry wanted to be clear that Meghan is not responsible for the poor relationship he has with his brother. When Harry and William were in school, William once said to Harry, "Pretend we don't know each other." This was a painful experience for Harry, who took it personally. It's interesting because he seems to have made some Meghan Markle videos which seem incredibly sexist and also borderline racist to me. Like that sort of racism you can't call out, but it's like, why do you hate her so much? Why? And you'll see that in this video. But, you know, he's saying, oh, Harry wanted to be clear that Meghan is not responsible. That's obviously not what Todd thinks. He then brings up that Harry and William, when they were in school, William said to Harry, "Pretend we don't know each other." And he's saying, oh, this was a painful experience for Harry, who took it personally. It's kind of belittling him. But Harry hasn't spoken about this in terms of, oh, you know, this is part of bullying from William, has he? He's spoken about that in the context of, I understand it. He's got 2 kids himself. He says, I understand it now, I'm older. You know, I get it. At the time, it was hard because it was just the 2 of us in this horrible system and I felt a bit alone. But he's not using that today to say that's a bad thing. He understands that. He says that, you know, it can be annoying sometimes for the older sibling to have the younger sibling around. Not something I can relate to. My brother is my best friend. He's my younger sibling. But that's not what he's saying. They're acting like, oh, he took it very personally. And it's demeaning. This whole video is just trying to undermine Harry as a personality, isn't it? So then he talks about how Harry spoke about the loss of his mother, gives some information. He talks about Charles not hugging his son, William and Harry having to perform to the public, taking flowers, walking behind the coffin. He describes how Harry cried only during the burial, and until he was 23, he believed that his mother might still be alive. He speaks about how Harry asked to see the police report, how he was angry at photographers for taking photos of Diana when she was in the vehicle and dying, and that he blamed photographers for her death. And then he says, despite the police report, blaming Diana's intoxicated driver. So he's kind of fact-checking Harry on his response to his own mother's death. There's something very sick about that. But, you know, let's actually think about this. He's bringing these things up, you know, as if to make out, as will become clear, that Harry is crazy, right? That he's paranoid, that he's into conspiracy, you know, and the idea that, oh, thinking his mother was alive is like a crazy thing to do. That's grief. And I think if you have knowledge of the actual situation Diana was in, I mean, it was a horrific situation. If you know about that system and what she was put through, and how she tried to kind of free herself from it, but couldn't really seem to do it, how she was constantly hounded, how she was miserable. You know, I'm sure Diana had spoken about how she wished she could just get away from it all, you know. I don't really think that's an appropriate thing to kind of mock somebody for, especially when it's something that comes from someone's grief, if that makes sense. If your mother has been routinely abused and you've seen it, and you've seen her crying and chased by people and hounded and, you know, mistreated by all the people around you, the adults around you, the system around you, and you've heard her say that she wishes she could just get away from it all, I can understand why in your mind you might think, maybe to shield yourself from grief, you might think, you know, maybe she's coming back. Now the thing is, how is that anything other than tragic and really sad, right? How does that not generate empathy? That's not something that you would then use to say, oh, this guy's crazy, would you? And this is somebody who acts like he understands like mental health and psychology. No, there's no empathy. That's the thing that's missing, and that's what tells on him. You know, there's no empathy involved here. If he really does think that Harry has gone completely mad because of the loss and the grief, then why is there the spite? Why is there the sarcasm? Like, why are there all these, like, nasty little digs? Why wouldn't it be coming from a place of pity and empathy and kindness? That's my question. Okay. Him talking about, you know, the police report. And again, it's so ridiculous. It's, right, this guy is supposed to be good at researching. Harry has said himself that it was explained to him and William that there were lots of, I think he described it as a sort of bicycle chain, but the idea that lots of factors were at play that evening. And yes, of course, the driver was intoxicated. They weren't wearing seatbelts. They were also, Diana was the most hunted woman on the planet. She was being pursued everywhere she went. It was making her miserable. They were at the time being pursued by cars and bikes and paparazzi. I think it's just, you know, he tries to portray this as really intellectual, but I actually think it's really ridiculous to act like being chased by paparazzi into that tunnel and being, you know, hunted by these people who are like rats, you know, who do take pictures of her when she's dying rather than helping her, to act like that didn't play a part is ridiculous. And even if that didn't play a part, I don't think that either of her children, you know, feeling angry about that is necessarily something to mock them for. Right? He then talks about how Harry served in the military, was a helicopter pilot, and this gave him a sense of purpose. But he suggested that he didn't realise at the time that he was really at war with himself, and that the war started when his mother died. He also speaks about how Harry used different substances to try and handle his grief. Okay, so he then says that in 2016, Harry was treated by a psychotherapist. He used psychedelics, drugs that helped him to remove the idea that he needed to cry to prove he missed his mother. So we know that Harry said that what he really struggled with, and again, it's really relatable. I think people don't really talk about it enough. If you've gone through trauma or loss, some people do become really numb, and it actually becomes sort of stepping away from your body and not being able to think about it, because if you think about it, you'll fall apart. That's really relatable. He then says this odd comment, right? And he keeps making these really bizarre statements, and he says them as if he said something clever. But I sit there and I think, that doesn't make sense. What you've just said. Wait a minute. Can we pause here? Just because you say it in that voice, deliver it in that tone, doesn't mean it's not nonsense. Right, he says about the psychedelics, right? This seems like a highly specific action to expect from a drug, but I guess this is what Harry believes. Like, so what? Harry's, I'm really, like, that is a leap. That doesn't make sense. He just carries on with this. But, you know, first of all, Harry's not on trial here. We don't need to be like, he's not accused of a crime. We're not sitting here like, oh, let's fact check the way you talk about how you dealt with the grief of your mother and the psychedelics you took. Let's fact check, you know, oh, I don't think psychedelics could actually make you realise that you didn't need to cry. You know, he tries to create this, like, and a lot of them do this. A lot of these propaganda merchants and the smearers do this. They create this weird, like, idea around something that Meghan and Harry has done or said or believes, and then they counter it, right? It's like how when Camilla Tominey, which I have a video coming on, do you remember when Meghan was talking about Archie and how Archie loved books, and she said that he had a voracious appetite for books, right? Because he loved it when they read to him. So they'd read to Archie and he really loved that. So then Camilla Tominey decided to say that she made up the idea. Meghan says that Archie reads and he's a voracious reader. But that's curious, isn't it? How can a child of that age be reading books? That's suspicious. And it's like, yeah, it's because you've willfully misinterpreted it and are now battling against something you've made up yourself. That's what this man is also doing. He then moves on to the idea about Camilla, Queen Consort. This is what he says. Harry felt as though Camilla was dangerous because she had a strong desire to rehabilitate her image. I don't think Harry has to look too far to find someone else in his life who has that exact same desire. So unbiased, so academic, but also what on earth does it mean? Actually, what does it mean? You know, just some research would expose the fact that this is extremely unintelligent. Just right off the bat, it's unintelligent, right? So just some basic background, which is not hard to understand, I don't think, if you just do a little bit of research, is that in terms of rehabilitating your image, so the thing with Camilla is that she was basically seeing Charles. Charles married Diana when Diana was a teenager. So Diana was chosen because she was young. She didn't have any experience with boyfriends. But he intended to keep seeing Camilla, and he and Camilla, who were both in their 30s at the time, whereas Diana was a teenager, were seeing each other. And it really just broke Diana's heart because she was kind of this, she was only married for show, but really she was being quite mistreated and she felt very unloved. So basically this was an affair that was going on. So Camilla was cheating on her husband at the time, and Charles was cheating on Diana, who was like a teenager that had been selected for this role and wasn't being treated very well and was really unwell. You know, the idea is of Camilla having to rehabilitate her image is because of that situation, right? That was what she was rehabilitating because that had come out in the press. Now, if he's implying that Meghan is the person in Harry's life who has this exact same desire, the person he doesn't have to look too far to find, then I want to ask the question, what exactly does he think that Meghan has done that she needs to rehabilitate her image for? Because as far as I can see, Meghan has suffered racial abuse. So I'm just a bit confused. You know, it's not, Meghan hasn't been part of an affair where a teenager was really badly hurt and used as a sort of sacrificial lamb. She hasn't been accused of bullying said teenager. You know, this idea that Meghan, it doesn't make sense. The idea that Meghan is seeking to also rehabilitate her image, but from what? From racism? From sexism? Like, what has she actually done? Like, some very basic common sense destroys this argument. And, you know, these pretend academic tones, they hide something really ugly. You know, by comparing them and, in fact, making out that in some ways Meghan is worse, it's denying the fact that what she faced, which is a fact, she faced racism, right? The coverage in this country, I can tell you I'm here in Britain, was incredibly racist. It was incredibly sexist. Being an other meant that she was incredibly abused, and because of the stuff that's been going on politically in this country around the same time, she's become an avatar for certain people with nasty views to put all their hate onto, basically. To imply that she would need to rehabilitate her image from that, this coming from a so-called doctor, is really quite disgusting. I'd like to know exactly what he means by that, but I'm sure he won't explain. He then says, Harry implied that Camilla somehow gained favour with the press at his expense. And again, it's just his own lack of research and understanding. He's presenting it like it'd be like, imagine if I like looked out of the window and I just didn't understand that clouds were a thing. And I went, suspicious, isn't it? That they say the sky is blue, but I see all these white things on it. And I went, I wonder what that's about. And obviously people would say, Claudia, they're clouds. They're clouds. They're lower than the sky. And that'll be the end of it, right? He doesn't seem to understand what he's even arguing against. It's just so ridiculous. Like, he's right, this idea that, Camilla somehow, how's Harry arguing that she somehow gained favour with the press? Well, Harry's spoken about that. I'm not saying you have to agree with his argument, but he doesn't even understand the argument. Harry's argument is that in the system they live in, they kind of give certain bits to the press, so they play ball to a certain degree, and that gets them a little bit of protection. But in order to do that, it means somebody else kind of has to get the negative headlines and someone has to be sacrificed. So that's the kind of situation. The idea is that the different royals have their own kind of PR contacts, and they're constantly trying to make sure that they're not getting bad press. So that's not a ridiculous thing to think. It's something that is known about here. You know, lots of journalists have come forward and spoken about that themselves. So I don't really know what he's talking about. He then talks about how Harry describes that William couldn't get past the fact that Meghan was divorced, biracial, American, and an actress. And then he says, to be fair to her, some people believe that Meghan should never be accused of being an actress. What a spiteful and nasty little man. I mean, to be fair to him, some people believe that Dr. Todd Grande should never be accused of being an unbiased and professional authority in his field, if it even is his field. And what you also see in him is when he talks about Harry speaking about how Meghan is the love of his life, he seems to find that, I noticed he seems to kind of deliver that with sort of scorn. And it is interesting, because I think people who dedicate their lives to this kind of stuff, I think they do have a sort of innate anger and jealousy about people who have empathy and love and kindness in their lives, and who are able to give that and receive that. because I think there's something lacking in their lives, personally. I think that's why they all seem so... It's such a bizarre thing to us for someone to be so scornful about people loving each other, but I think that's what it is. He also talks about how Harry and Meghan admonishing the press over the racist coverage, as if kind of they're kicking up a fuss. And I feel like if your argument places the couple fighting back against the racist press as the villains, what side of the argument do you think you're on? You actually get to a point where a couple's saying, you know what, maybe the press shouldn't be racist, and yet they're still the villains in your story, is making me wonder things about you, really. And I think it's because he's doubling down, because I think he's talked himself into a corner, because you know, I'm sure his channel probably started out a lot more intellectual and unbiased, but it's obviously, we know it's a big business, isn't it, to talk rubbish about people, and he seems to have done this thing where he realizes it will make him money, so now he just takes on whatever popular kind of victim blaming's going on and gives it this kind of fake intelligent veneer, and he puts in, I have to say, he's not funny. He tries to put in these one-liners, but they're not very good. They're not very good, you know, and he's been giving this kind of sarcastic narrative, and now he can't kind of step back, so he's having to double down, and it's got to a point where these people are now apparently on the side of the racists. Like, they've strayed so far now. They can't just say, you know, maybe we got this wrong, maybe we were kind of biased here. Like, there's nothing fair. There's nothing fair here whatsoever. You know, oh no, imagine admonishing the press for racism. How evil. Okay, so then he talks about the fight between William and Harry, which he says is alleged, and he describes how Harry is pushed to the ground and his back is cut. And I think that's pretty interesting, you know, the kind of language used here, and I think we see this in a lot of sexual assaults, in a lot of abuse cases. Look at the ownership of those things and that language. And again, we did this on my course. He talks about how Harry's back is cut, right? It's very much, it's not William attacked Harry, and because of William's attack, Harry's back was injured, right? William injured Harry's back. William cut Harry's back with his action. He kind of acts like, a lot of these people act like Harry just kind of like fell down. Harry just happened to fall down and onto the dog bowl somehow, and how could that have happened? And this is the most bizarre thing for me. It's really weird. This is his quote. Harry said that he was defending Meghan from William's verbal attacks, but curiously, Meghan was not actually physically present. And I'm thinking, do you not understand words and language? Or people, or human beings, right? Am I going insane? Like, defending Meghan verbally against William's verbal attacks makes perfect sense. Like, what is so hard to understand? It's like they're trying to... He keeps saying, and curiously such and such a thing happened, but he just describes a really normal thing that for some reason his own biases have made him unable to now comprehend. You know, it's ridiculous. I'm sorry, have you never been in a situation where, say a friend or a loved one of yours is being badmouthed, like verbally attacked, right, by somebody you know, and they're not physically present, but you then verbally defend them by saying, do not speak about that person like that in my presence, please, or you defend them against those attacks or allegations, right? Why is he pretending that... It's so weird. Like, I guess it's very suspicious. He says that William was attacking Meghan verbally, and Harry defended her, but Meghan wasn't there. Like, it's so funny. It's funny. I don't understand it. It's just such weird implications. Like, he thinks that someone has to be physically present for you to verbally defend them. It doesn't make sense. He then says, in his book, he says he broke a dog bowl when he hit the ground, which is how his back was cut. Wow. Okay. He says he broke a dog bowl when he hit the ground. Like, again, it's like Harry just magically fell down and broke a dog bowl. Like, it doesn't matter that he was assaulted, allegedly, and hit, you know, he was pushed into it. No, he just fell down, you know. It's so ridiculous, you know. And also interesting, this doctor who talks about true crime, and again, he's got a history of victim blaming, which you can, you know, I might talk about that. This might be too long. It's so interesting. There's not a single word about the person that assaulted Harry. It's very much like, oh, he's making a big deal of it. Oh, how dare he get attacked and hit the ground? I guess he's the villain because he fell down. You know, it really fills me with faith that he's covering these abuse dynamics fairly and accurately. And giving, you know, I'm sure he's making the world a better place with his videos. He then says this, prepare yourselves, it's a real zinger. In addition, William broke Harry's necklace. I'm not aware of any description of the necklace, but I'm pretty sure it's not a pearl necklace because Harry would have clutched that so tightly it never would have broken off his neck. I can't breathe for laughing. It's so funny. Right, first of all, I feel like we have to get past the point. The jokes aren't funny. It's just not funny. It's not funny at all. It just doesn't make sense. Where's it going? You know, on a joke level. I'm not aware of any description of the necklace. I mean, this is kind of irrelevant, but I'm aware of the description of the necklace. It's something that has it has the heartbeats of Harry's children on it, actually. But again, like, it's this idea of like pearl clutching, and it's blaming a victim, right? So it doesn't matter that literally he actually acknowledges, he's not saying it's not necessarily true, he acknowledges that Harry had the necklace pulled off him, and that Harry was pushed, and that Harry ended up with a cut back, right? There's no words from this doctor about how, wow, maybe Harry's actually a victim in that situation, maybe assaulting people isn't the right way to go. Instead, he's gone for pearl clutching. So pearl clutching basically means, you know, making a huge dramatic thing about getting assaulted. Like, why is this man saying this? It's so harmful because so many victims will watch his channel, right? Because they'll get recommended it, because if you watch like a lot of mental health and trauma content, that's kind of how he kind of brands himself in some ways. Sorry, I had to get the door. But pearl clutching, you know, the idea of it's kind of, in some ways it's kind of embarrassing to use it on a man anyway, isn't it? It's that idea of, oh no, like, I'm being dramatic, I'm making a fuss. It's so often used on abuse victims, isn't it? Pearl clutching. Like, how dare you like make such a dramatic fuss about being physically assaulted? And let's not forget as well, right, an injury was inflicted. Harry didn't even realise there was an injury, so he realised he was hurt. Later on, Meghan realised that he had cuts on his back. He didn't even realise, he was in shock, and to me that makes me feel like that's someone who's kind of learned not to make a fuss. You know, he didn't immediately, not that there's anything wrong with, if you're assaulted and you immediately make a fuss about it, good for you. You've got every right. But, you know, this depiction also is wrong, because what we're also not seeing covered here, which again you would think would be something important for this doctor of these dynamics, is that William went when Meghan wasn't present. He assaulted Harry. He then denied he'd assaulted Harry. And he then swore Harry to secrecy about it. That's not a fight, is it? When you have a fight, a fight usually means both people are fighting, and it doesn't involve, by the way, don't tell anyone I did that to you. By the way, I didn't, and also don't tell anyone. That's an abuser mentality, you know. The idea of don't tell anyone as well, also saying, but I didn't do it, but don't tell anyone. It's like, what is there to tell then? It's so transparent, but it's really dangerous. He then says, Harry made it seem as though William was under the spell of the media. Like, as if he's not sitting there acting like Harry is under the spell of Meghan somehow. Like, he's just peddling the same old sexist stereotypes that we've had since the Tudor times, since the medieval era. He then goes really academic again, and he talks about how Harry was worried that Meghan would take her own life. And this coming straight after that pearl clutching joke, I'll say, that's me being very generous there, is disgusting. And this is what I mean about other cases he's done. There's no empathy there at all. This is a man who, his wife, who he loved, was in danger of taking her life. And now you've just made a joke about him pearl clutching. He then says, Anderson then asked Harry why he is making public statements. Harry responded that he tried to resolve the situation quietly, but his family conspired against him. And Todd kind of delivers that last bit like it's a mad conspiracy theory, like, oh, Harry says that his family won't talk to him privately, and oh, they're conspiring against him. He then says this is just one more in a series of murky answers provided by Harry. Well, based on what? Remember, this is still the unbiased section, so, you know, we're in for quite a ride. He then talks about how Elizabeth Windsor died, and he mentions that Harry wasn't invited to travel with his family, although there was room on the plane. And also in the context of, you know, his nastiness and maliciousness here, it just feels like he's just getting at, he feels like he's just getting at the individuals, isn't it? It's like, oh, they didn't even want you there. Like, it's just really abusive. He then says, Anderson countered him with the obvious question at this point. How can Harry's family be sure that Harry won't reveal the contents of any conversations to the public? Harry didn't answer the question. Rather, he said something about how his family told lies about his wife to the point where they had to run away from our country. Think about that phrasing, right? He said something about, you know, it's just trying to make his argument sound rubbish. Everything in Harry's argument makes sense. It doesn't mean that you have to agree. You might think he's even lying, right? But the argument he's making, you know, oh, he said something about, that something about is the entire basis of his argument. And if you can't grasp that, then why are you making a video on it? And also, it is a direct answer to the question. Harry being asked about, you know, why is he talking publicly? You know, when his family feel like they might feel like they're afraid to speak to him because he might make things public. His response to that makes perfect sense. He's saying that they also make things public, and for a long time they have been part of the negative media coverage that he's had. So things about him have been leaked. In his argument, he's saying that things about him and his wife have been leaked negatively by his family. They're just not putting their names to it, but his argument is that they are doing it. So he's responding. That's his argument. Why would you take his argument out of it if you're doing some academic roundup? He also notes about Harry, before he finished the word country, he changed that to my country. But what's odd about that? He keeps making these statements like they're mic drops and like they mean something, but they don't mean anything. What do you mean? It's another one of those, curious moments. He then says that the interview concludes with Harry saying all he has ever asked for is a relationship with his family. Now moving to my analysis. And do you know what? I did laugh. I had to laugh. Like, was that not it? That was the unbiased and factual part, apparently. So, yeah. I was like, really? Wow. I'm just going to shut my curtain because I think the light's gone really bad. I mean, but you do have to laugh. I mean, that was the factual portion. So, you know, there's no empathy to this man. You know, he's just openly mocking people in a really cold, icy way with unfunny jokes that are way too long. And people are just kind of lapping it up because they're on the hate train at this point. It's just mass bullying. Imagine trying to present that as your unbiased part and now it's the analysis. Makes sense. Okay. Now, he sorts his analysis into items because that makes them sound more official. Items, of course. Okay, so here we go. So item number 1 is basically about how Harry believed his mother was alive and thought she was coming back to him until he was 23. So he talks about Harry having beliefs in conspiracies and how he believes that Harry was in denial about his mother's death, which has spread to anger at the British press and now anger to his family for not doing enough to counter the media narratives. And you know what? If that is your item number 1, so essentially what he's saying as his first item is that Harry didn't deal well with the death of his mother and he's now believes in conspiracies and he's overly paranoid and suspicious. And that's something I would argue against anyway. But if that is your argument, then how incredibly wicked and malicious it is to be making these videos with such a mocking and sarcastic tone if you and I don't believe it, if you genuinely think that this is somebody that was so traumatised by a loss that they suffered as a child that they've lost their mind. That's how you know it's a lie, because if you genuinely thought that, right, if these people really thought that, would they be mocking or would they be concerned and empathetic, right? He says this, Harry says his family's silence is betrayal. Here we see this theme that Harry has not grieved the loss of his mother, he is consumed with anger, trapped in the past. Perhaps he is frozen at the age of 12. He has come to accept that certain things are true, like his mother is actually dead, but he's still processing information like a 12-year-old. I'm going to need some academic or scientific information on that. There's nothing about Harry that is acting like a 12-year-old. I mean, is this doctor actually suggesting, what's he suggesting, that Harry is suffering from regression? Like, and again, if so, if he genuinely believes that Harry was so traumatised that he became stuck at the age of 12, then where's the empathy and kindness? Where is it? It's not present, is it? And also it's a way to pathologise his anger, which he has a right to. I mean, his mother was terribly treated. We all know that Diana was abused, that Diana was hounded, and they made her life completely miserable. You know, them saying, oh, he's consumed by anger, trapped in the past, as if being consumed by anger about how his mother died and how she lived, really, how she was treated, is a bad thing to be. That's not a bad thing to be, is it? You know, I hate this, you know, pathologising of healthy anger, and he does this a lot. There's a case where a teenager, a 15-year-old, is allegedly being abused by her mother, and he basically reduces it to, oh, maybe they shouldn't shout at each other. That's his kind of solution to the situation. He then suggests that Harry thinks that his mother's coming back in other people, and that Meghan Markle has exploited Harry's desires, and that saving her will lead to the redemption he is looking for regarding his mother. And I have to be extremely British here and just say, you what, mate? We need to unpack that. You can't just sit there and say, oh, anyway, Meghan exploited Harry's desires, and just leave it there. Explain that. And these people can't explain it, right? They sit there and they say these things, and it's like, well, in what sense, other than your own sexism here, and possibly your own racism? You know, and thus saving her will lead to the redemption he is looking for regarding his mother. That's a misuse of wording, isn't it? Redemption. Why does Harry need redemption? In that case, that doesn't make sense. Harry's also describing a very real pattern of how the media especially treats women in the royal family. And he doesn't just talk about Meghan, he talks about how the same has happened with Kate as well. So... And he talks like this is his analysis of the situation. And it's just, by the way, he's just sitting there like, anyway, by the way, I'm a bit sexist, so I reckon she snared him. That's what I think. Okay, item number 2 is the theme of sibling rivalry. He says this: Harry titled his book Spare, which could suggest that he's bitter his brother was born first and will probably be king someday. And look, just read and just do some research. And it isn't that hard, right? It's not that hard to research. It's not that Harry wanted to be king. It's Harry's not said that. It's pretty clearly that Harry feels badly about the fact he was born to be second best and the backup. You know, in family dynamics, we see that with the scapegoat. You know, that's quite a normal thing for a child and later an adult to feel angry or bitter about or resentful about. Like, why are we pathologizing that? That's not a healthy system for children. I think we can all acknowledge that. Like, there's nothing wrong with feeling angry about that. But what Todd seems to be suggesting is that Harry actually wants to be king, which also doesn't make sense because Harry's not trying to do that, is he? He's tried to move away from that. He often describes how he feels pity for William. He understands the situation that William and his dad are in, and he's described before how he feels they're trapped. You know, this is not somebody who's trying to make his bid to be king. Todd Grande then says, Harry previously stated that the royal family was envious of Meghan's popularity, like she was outshining them. Taking all of these pieces together, you could make an argument that Harry is simply jealous of William. And no, you couldn't. Like, what? Where's the logic? He just says words. You know, do some research. There is history in this family with a situation where you cannot outshine the heir. So with Diana, for example, she was very popular, but she couldn't be too popular. If she was seen to outshine Charles, then there was a huge problem. You know, the idea of them being envious of her popularity is something that we've seen documented with Diana. This is not just something that Harry's randomly plucking out of nowhere. We have documented evidence for this, and I guess you could argue against it, I suppose, but you know, the very notion of monarchy being that the heir or the monarch at the time has to be really special, for that system to work, you have to have the other people around them not outshining them, right? That's part of how it works. You know, if you have any knowledge or actual research skills, you can see that this happened with Diana. There's so much evidence of this. And also, how on earth does this lead to him thinking that Harry is therefore jealous of William? And here's the thing, right? I think that what we need to think about in terms of abuse dynamics is that there's actually nothing wrong with him feeling slightly jealous in terms of, as a child, being the scapegoat versus the golden child and feeling like, why is he the heir, right? What we're not going to do is take a victim from that situation, which Harry was, and then act like him being frustrated by that is bad. But also, we need to note that as an adult, that's not what he's articulating. Think about it. If Harry really genuinely was so jealous of William and he wanted to destroy him, he wouldn't have waited. Like, he's holding so much back. He hasn't actually said anything that incendiary. You know, they're acting like he has. But seriously, if in his position, if he genuinely wanted to destroy that monarchy and destroy his brother, he could have said anything. You know, he could have said terrible things. Just imagine, right? He hasn't done those things. He could have, and he hasn't. He then says he did not like being in William's shadow, therefore he is lashing out by revealing all these family secrets. And again, he's done this before. He sides with the abuser. His opinion seems to be that if you're abused by your family or someone more powerful, then you should just take it and grow up and stop pearl clutching and maybe just like not talk about it, is apparently his opinion. But also, you know, he doesn't like being in William's shadow. That's fair. You know, you wouldn't raise children that way. Also, he's lashing out by revealing all these family secrets. Takes out the context of Harry saying that he's tried to make some distance, but the press coverage of him and Meghan has continued. He's still being thrown under the bus. Remember, he's saying that the royal family are leaking stories to the press about him. They're just not putting their names to it. And all these family secrets. I'm not being funny, but Harry's life, as he experienced it, is not a family secret. He's entitled to his own story, especially considering it's told in countless books and by countless journalists by people who don't know him. He then says, if Harry cannot be king, he is willing to burn the whole system down. I mean, well, he's left it a bit late, hasn't he, if that was the plan. I mean, Harry has openly said he's pro-monarchy, which for me personally is the only thing I don't really agree with him on, because I don't believe in the monarchy at all. I think a system of hereditary birthright, I've said this too many times, is not right. But if he wanted to burn the system down, do you not think, seriously, do you think this is how he'd be doing it? Like, there's so many easier ways to burn that system down. I bet he's got so many secrets. I bet he knows so many things about people that he could just throw out there and burn the whole thing down like Regina George. He says he still sees a future for the monarchy. You know, he still believes in it. And then Todd Grande says, this is so funny, everyone. Prepare for another joke. He says, maybe Harry has throne envy. It's so funny. He then says, I find it curious, however, that Harry is not interested in giving up his royal title. He wishes he could be king, but prince is better than nothing. Like, that doesn't make sense. He always says, I find it curious, before he says something that doesn't make sense. It's curious because you're not thinking with common sense. If Harry wanted to burn the system down, as you say, he wouldn't still be calling himself a prince, and he wouldn't still be pro-monarchy, would he? He then goes to item number 3. Right. Other than earning millions of dollars, it's not clear how Harry's repeated negative claims about his family are helping anything. What change does Harry want? What is his objective? Is this supposed to make the world a better place? I could ask the same about Dr. Todd Grande's YouTube channel. I mean, what's the objective here other than to just, like, get hate clicks and get more money from trashing somebody that's popular to trash and not doing your research? There's nothing constructive in his videos. There's no empathy. There's no understanding. So no one can learn from anything anyway. Repeated negative claims about his family, you know, and he's done this before. Again, like I said, with the 15-year-old abuse victim who claimed she was being abused by her mother. His immediate response was, oh, don't be negative about the family. So he's basically pro-abuse, essentially. By that logic, you know, it's be quiet about the abuse. The problem isn't the abuse itself. The problem is the person talking about the abuse, apparently. Item number 4. Harry didn't mention this in the 60 Minutes interview. He does, kindly state. But in his book, he claimed he contacted a therapist immediately after the 2019 physical altercation with his brother. I find this curious, because Harry previously said that Meghan was not allowed to call a therapist when she was depressed. So the royal family has a policy that somehow permitted Harry to see a therapist, but not Meghan. That is difficult to believe. And it's of course, it sounds curious and difficult to believe because you're not presenting the full facts. And again, I'm not even saying you have to like Harry and Meghan, like you could be totally against them, but at least represent what they're saying fairly so that it can be counted, you know? What Meghan actually wanted, and she spoke about this in the Oprah interview, is that she needed more than just to see a therapist. What she wanted was to actually go and stay somewhere. She was so suicidal and concerned that she wanted to actually stay at a hospital, like at a facility where she would be protected at the time. So she says that she was sending emails and reaching out for help, and she was basically told or instructed that it would look really bad if she went and stayed in the hospital if it got out, and so she shouldn't do that. Right. It's not that she wasn't able to, like, contact a therapist, for example, but I think we already know this from what happened with Diana. You know, they do run on image, right? And we know that family runs on image. It's not too hard to believe that the person she went to in the institution said to her, look, I am sympathetic, but you can't go and stay somewhere. And that's what she was asking for. You know, she doesn't have her own passport with, you know, they've got all that stuff. You know, all these kind of things, if it gets out to the press, I can imagine the royal family, the people in charge of the royal family, the firm, you know, finding that difficult because they care so much about headlines, you know, oh, Meghan's crazy, she's gone to stay in a psychiatric hospital. And it would cause a scandal. She's already a bit of a target. People might think she was weak or difficult. She's already got a reputation of being difficult. She doesn't want to let the side down. It's a really complex situation. So I don't know why he's reducing it to this. I say I don't know. Of course I know why he's reducing it to this, but it's incredibly harmful. Okay, item number 5. Harry has made a number of murky statements. He dodges questions with responses which are unrelated. This is exemplified in his criticisms of Camilla. How did Camilla gain favour with the media at Harry's expense? This is a pretty serious allegation. If it's true, Harry should be able to say exactly how Camilla did it, but he won't. Maybe he can't. I'm sorry, it's just so frustrating that he pretends he doesn't understand the argument, so everything's so curious, because he can't be bothered to do any research. He's explained this really well. Like, for example, very recently, so Camilla has obviously got a connection with people in the tabloids to give her better coverage. After the bad press she got after the whole thing with Diana, obviously she's kind of palled up to them and they've got a kind of transactional relationship, it would seem. For example, she invited Jeremy Clarkson, who wrote a really sexually particularly violent and vile article about Meghan recently to her private party. Piers Morgan, who routinely harasses and abuses Meghan on the television. And Piers Morgan has said that a senior member of the royal family thanked him for that. That's interesting. I believe she's good friends with certain editors of the different tabloids, you know, saying, oh, Harry can't explain it, when actually he is explaining it, and is explaining it time and time again. You know, I feel like that's how you know these people are fake, because they're not actually listening to the argument. I could understand if he'd said, okay, so Harry says this is how the system works, but I have a counter argument about the system. But they won't even acknowledge it because it's all just fake. Or listen to this. Harry would have us believe that despite his non-stop talking about his family, he is somehow holding back details to protect them. More likely, there are no details available because he's fabricating stories. But why is that more likely? If this is your analysis, like, you just say that, but why is that more likely? Why is it more likely to you that he's fabricating stories? Especially when there's history with this happening with Diana. And if you were making up stories, I've said this before, you'd go bigger. If you were actually trying to destroy that family, right, if he's the person that Todd Grande thinks he is, and you wanted to destroy that family, you could go so much bigger with your lies. Like, imagine the things you could say, the things you could, like, you could set that place on fire. Harry has been actually quite tame. He's waited a really long time, which actually makes sense of what he said of trying to resolve it privately. You know, it's taken him a while. He's been very measured. Grande then says this: the dislike of Camilla could tie back with Harry's unresolved conflict regarding his mother. Gee, you don't say! Like, what a genius! Like, I wonder if part of Harry's issue with Camilla is because she was part of abusing his mother. Wow, the intelligence. But also, look, he also says here, like, he will not accept Camilla trying to be a substitute for Diana. And again, it's trying to, like, it's making these assumptions, and this is no longer academic at all, is it? It's just this idea he has. Harry specifically said that Camilla is selling stories to the press, right? Or that's what he believes that she is doing, right? That's his argument. This idea that, oh, I guess because she mistreated Harry's mother, Harry might not like her very much. As if that's a point. Like, if that was true, what does that change? Okay, item number 6. One of his arguments is that he's morally superior to the British royal family. And they keep saying this, but where has he said this? He's not said this. This is other people's anxiety, because they've realised they've actually been quite sexist and racist in this, and actually supporting a lot of abuse. And they're doubling down, and now they feel personally victimised. Like, they actually feel bad because they think that Harry actually probably is a nicer person, probably. They probably think that Meghan and Harry actually aren't as bad as they've been painted. And now they're freaking out because they look like the villains. He says he may have been biased before he met Meghan, but she set him free, which opened up a whole new world of insight. Now he looks at his family with disdain. They are guilty of institutional bias. If they had only allowed themselves to be enlightened as well, all their problems would have been solved. If they had embraced Meghan, she would have pulled them out of the darkness. And does this man not understand racism? Does he not understand institutional racism, right? And unconscious bias, like conditioning, the history of the royal family, which is imperialist and based on colonialism. It's not that mad to imagine that people who haven't been exposed to people of other races might have not bad intentions, but might hold unconscious bias. Like, it's not hard to understand that. He just keeps saying ignorant things and wondering why he can't figure them out. Like it's not crazy. I mean, I come from a mixed family. My mum is white, my dad is Indian. My mum, you know, the white side of my family didn't understand the whole effects of the British Empire and colonialism and what that meant for India, not because they were bad people, but because they didn't know. They learned their histories at school from their angle, and then it really made them see more. Like, my mum realised so much of the racism that my dad faced, not because she was racist before, but because she hadn't thought about it. Of course it opens your eyes when the person that you love and when your children are mixed race, you notice it more, of course you do. Like, what's so weird about that? He then says, I find it interesting that Harry's argument is predicated on his insight, the one thing that is notably absent from his life. I mean, I don't know if it's absent from his life, but insight is notably absent from Todd Grande's channel. He then says this: Harry seems disjointed, confused, superstitious, and has a history of failed attempts to understand himself, yet he was just one Meghan Markle away from perfect insight. He then says this: I think it's more accurate to say he believes he has insight, which is a hazardous position for someone without it. Yes, Mr. Todd Grande, you're quite right. It is quite hazardous, isn't it, to act like you have expertise when you're really peddling things which are very dangerous and malicious. So again, you know, it's a lie that he genuinely believes that Harry is, you know, this traumatized person that's been victimized and taken under Meghan's spell. And you know this because he's not talking about him with the empathy that would come with that idea. That's it. It's very simple. If you really did think that, there'd be compassion towards Harry, and there's none. It's just the same old, he's crazy, he's bad, he's stupid. It's just really dodgy. Okay, then he says, this brings me to item number 7. There's so many items, like, I don't know why. It's just a checklist of things he doesn't like. Why are they items? I don't know. So in his book, he talks about Harry's superstitious mannerisms in his book, which he says are exemplified when he talks about how his wife sang to seals, as in the aquatic mammal. I don't know why he specifies the aquatic mammal. I don't know what other seals he's talking about. And the seals sang back to her. He says that Harry believed that this signified that he and Meghan were going to have a child. He says this, in this passage of the book, Harry said that Meghan was magic. By ascribing supernatural powers to Meghan, Harry once again perpetuated this theme where he falsely believes that he has had an epiphany. And I just want to say, right, I haven't reached this part in the book, but I don't think it's actually that weird to fondly describe your partner as magic, right? It's not a literal thing, I assume. You know, saying your partner is magic and wonderful and perfect and amazing doesn't need like a whole host of people. If I sat there and said to you that I'm actually single right now, but if you said about your partner, like if you were gushing about them and you went, oh, they're perfect, you don't need someone sitting there like, excuse me, perfect. I don't think any person is actually perfect. Let me point you to this thing that they did once. Oh, look, a hair's out of place. Like, that's not normal or human behaviour. Okay, and moving to my final item number 8. I hope it's a good one. Harry makes it seem as though his true enemy is the British press. In his estimation, they murdered his mother, drove his wife to depression, and manipulated his family. In an effort to counteract how the press has revealed secrets about his family, Harry has gone on a campaign of revealing secrets about his family. And again, he seems to take out any of the... It's so victim-blaming because he seems to take out any of the power imbalance here, any of the context. Like, he's one of those people that probably thought that... And he probably thinks that Antifa, if that's how you pronounce it, you know, anti-fascists are... Wow, they've become the very thing they sought to destroy because they're anti-fascists. Wow, they're just like the fascists because they're also a group of people who think something, even though the thing they think is different. He says this, through his amazing insight and his glorious ascension to quasi-royal status, what a sentence, Harry has morphed into the very thing that he despises. He has made millions of dollars sharing secrets and perhaps fabricating stories. Fortunately for the British royal family, unlike the press, Harry will someday run out of secrets to tell. They always accuse Harry of being this narcissist, right? But they imagine it themselves. The way they talk about him with this, you know, grandeur, and it's not a way that Harry and Meghan speak about themselves. These people build them up to this in their minds so they can counter them, but it's not a thing that exists. Sharing secrets and perhaps fabricating stories, and I just want to ask why? What makes you think that he's fabricating the stories? You know, it just comes out of nowhere. Like, why? So when an abuse victim comes forward, you blame them for it, you give them a character assassination, you look at everything in their life that's gone wrong for them, you try and make them the villain, basically, and then you say, oh, I guess they're making it up. I guess they're making it up. Okay, and to finalise, here we go. And his conclusion. Those were my thoughts on Harry's interview on 60 Minutes. Please put any opinions in the comments. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you find my analysis of this topic to be as insightful as pregnancy prognosticating singing seals. Thanks for watching. Wow, what an intelligent sign-off that was. That's so smart. No, this whole, oh, it will generate an interesting dialogue. How can anyone have an interesting dialogue when you're just putting out the same hate pieces without backing anything up? That's not a dialogue. This is it's fake. It's such fake. It's like this fake academic veneer that's so biased. And I just wanted to say one more thing. I saw this really bizarre short that he put out. You know, you can put shorts on YouTube now. And this is where he talks about the alleged assault, which he also says might not even have happened. But even, you know, he thinks it didn't happen, but he takes great care to use distancing language about how actually maybe Harry was pearl clutching anyway, just in case it is true. And also journalists have said they knew about it. You know, British journalists and people in the press have said they knew about this for a while, but were told not to say anything about it. It was also mentioned in a book, but okay. He says that something he finds so curious again, is that sure, William attacks Harry, but isn't Harry shouting? He even admits, like Dr. Grande says, that Harry admits that they're both shouting at each other and it became quite ugly because they were shouting, right? And he's using this to ask, well, you know what? Maybe William did snap, and maybe William did physically assault someone, his actual younger brother who didn't fight back. But you know what? They were shouting at each other, so really, isn't Harry just as bad? Like, that's his argument here. He also says the same thing about Meghan not being there. That makes no sense. Anyone with actual, like, critical thinking skills can understand that makes no sense. He basically refers to William as snapping, you know, as though Harry made him go there, as if Harry forced him to do it. He doesn't even say anything about how physical violence is actually bad. You know, I guarantee you, if it had been the other way around, it would be like violent Harry, like beats up his poor, innocent, defenseless brother. And actually, you know what? It is bad to escalate to physical violence. You know, it is a bad thing to do. And it's bad to do that, then deny you've done it, but also say, by the way, don't tell anyone about that. And then to put it out there as if it was just a fight. So you get ahead of it. You know, I suppose I find Todd Grande a curious individual. Anyway, so, hope you enjoyed this, if that's possible. I have a small channel compared to him. I don't mind putting myself out there for this because, you know, I just feel like, what's the point if you can't call out these things? I'm no expert myself, but I just think something really awful is happening, and so many people are just jumping on the bandwagon. So this is longer than usual. Hope you enjoyed. If you have anything you want me to talk about, let me know in the description box. Please put your comments in there because it always generates an interesting dialogue. Okay. I love you loads, and I'll see you really soon. All right, love you. Bye.